This is how desperate the people in Northern Gaza are. This aid truck, filmed at the end of January, is one of the last to enter the region. And here's why: aid so often caught in the fighting.
A new CNN investigation has found that Israeli forces have fired on a United Nations food convoy earlier this month in Gaza. Now, this was a convoy by UNRWA, the humanitarian organization that had been providing aid to Palestinians. And they had shown the press images of the convoy after it had been shelled by Israeli forces. Now, CNN wanted to do an investigation into that to either confirm or to show that it didn't actually happen. And they have found that the evidence does in fact confirm that the IDF fired at this convoy. Now, the incident took place on February 5th as the convoy was headed towards central Gaza before the IDF ultimately blocked trucks from entering the northern part of the territory. Now, in the north, Palestinians, as we've shared with you before, are currently on the verge of famine. They've been largely isolated from the rest of the Gaza Strip as a result of the fact that most people have evacuated the north to the south. You have more than 1 million displaced people now sheltering in the border town of Rafah. But about 300,000 Palestinians remain in the north, which is why humanitarian organizations have been attempting to get aid to them because they need it the most. Now, CNN has seen correspondence between the UN and the Israeli military that show the convoy's route was agreed upon by both parties prior to the strike, according to an internal incident report compiled by UNRWA, the main UN relief agency in Gaza, which was also seen by CNN. The truck was one of 10 in a convoy sitting stationary at an IDF holding point when it was fired upon. Now, for those who are concerned about some of the allegations coming from the Israeli government in regard to members of UNRWA being part of Hamas, I just want to remind you all of the Channel 4 investigation into those claims. They looked into those claims and they found that, in fact, every single UNRWA worker had previously been vetted and approved by the Israeli government. So now to turn around and argue that they are Hamas fighters is absolutely ridiculous, and they have failed to provide any evidence to back up those claims. Now, in regard to that convoy that was attacked, luckily no one was hurt, but much of the contents of that convoy, mainly wheat flour that's desperately needed to bake bread, were destroyed. And unfortunately, this also wasn't the first time the IDF attacked a convoy of humanitarian aid. They've also attacked warehouses storing food. Now, in the wake of the strike on February 5th, UNRWA decided to stop sending convoys to northern Gaza. The last time the agency was able to deliver food north of Wadi Gaza, a strip of wetlands that bisects the enclave, was on January 23rd. That was nearly a month ago. So it's been a month since UNRWA has been able to deliver humanitarian aid to Palestinians. And that was really the main organization that was providing the trickle of humanitarian aid that was allowed into the region by Israel. Now, the average number entering per day has fallen since February 9th to 60 trucks a day from more than 140 daily in January, according to figures from the United Nations Office for Humanitarian Coordination, also known as OCHA. Now, before the war, I just want to remind you all that 500 trucks of humanitarian aid were entering the Gaza Strip because, as you probably know, you might not, the conditions on the ground in Gaza, even prior to this war, were dire, were awful. People were hungry, they're living in poverty, and so they really did rely on these humanitarian organizations to provide the sustenance that they needed to survive. And I say that because you have to keep in mind what the situation on the ground in Gaza was even before this war. They are cut off from the international community in terms of trade. They're unable to engage in business, similar to how, let's say, the United States or Israel is able to engage in international trade and business. And that really did lead to a lack of jobs and quite a bit of poverty in the Gaza Strip. Now, UNRWA also noted that half of its mission requests have been denied since January. And so they undergo these security checks. All of the humanitarian aid in the convoys are looked at by the IDF, and they need to be approved before they enter the Gaza Strip. But any little thing that the IDF claims can be used or abused by Hamas ends up leading to a denial of the entirety of that convoy. So half of their convoy missions have been nixed by the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, making matters worse for those 300,000 Palestinians who are currently in the northern half of the Gaza Strip is the fact that the World Food Program has also paused its deliveries of food into the area. Now, relief workers said that intake of trucks and distribution have been crippled by a number of things. They name Israel's failure to ensure that the convoys will be safe from bombardment as one of the reasons. They also say that there's a breakdown in security with hungry Palestinians frequently overwhelming trucks because they're so desperate for food. I mean, imagine the situation they're in. They want to make sure at least their children are being fed. And so they'll storm these humanitarian aid convoys in order to get their hands on anything that can help their families survive. The World Food Program said it was forced to pause aid to the north because of complete chaos and violence due to the collapse of civil order. In a rare public criticism of Israel, a top US envoy, David Satterfield, said this week that its targeted killings of Gaza police commanders guarding truck convoys have made it virtually impossible to distribute the goods safely. Now, the World Food Program also said that it had first suspended deliveries to the north about 3 weeks ago after a strike actually ended up hitting one of their aid trucks. It tried resuming this week, but convoys on Sunday and Monday faced gunfire and crowds of hungry people stripping goods and basically beating one driver. So the situation again on the ground is incredibly dire. UNICEF, a UNICEF official by the name of Ted Chabin, said in a statement that Gaza is poised to witness an explosion in preventative child deaths, which would compound the already unbearable level of child deaths in Gaza. And families are currently limiting themselves to, if they're lucky, one meal a day. And often they resort to mixing animal and bird fodder with grains to bake bread that they're consuming. One man from the area of Zaytun in Gaza says that people have eaten whatever they find, including animal feed and rotten bread. Now, I wanna actually go back to the CNN investigation because I wanna share some of the evidence that they have provided as part of their investigation. So let's go to the first video, which provides satellite evidence of Israeli naval boats that are believed to have fired on the UN convoy.
The truck set off as part of a UN-marked convoy of 10 up Al-Rashid Road in the early hours. It reached an IDF holding point at 4:15 a.m. Stationary for over an hour, it was then hit at 5:35 a.m. Fortunately, no one on board was killed. The UN says they were hit by Israeli naval gunfire, and in satellite imagery taken just 2 hours after the attack, CNN identified ships that could only be Israeli naval boats. They've been deployed along the coast and are attacking Gaza from the west.
So after the International Court of Justice issued their preliminary opinion in regard to alleged genocide being committed in Gaza, not only did they say that it is plausible that a genocide is occurring, they also said that Israel must allow for humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip. And on multiple occasions, we've heard officials from Israel's far-right government argue that they are in fact coordinating and ensuring that more aid is getting into the Gaza Strip. But that statement is not reinforced by any level of evidence or fact, especially when you see what's happening on the ground, especially when you see that roads leading to Palestinians who desperately need the aid are bombed in order to prevent the convoys from traveling to them. You see them getting denied from entering altogether. As I mentioned earlier, you have UNRWA saying that about half of their convoys are rejected by the IDF. And you have now multiple instances of convoys being targeted by the IDF, by shelling, by bombing. And so it's just not really something that has been proven in any way that Israel is interested or is willing to provide more humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people. And as a result, there has been a report released. It was released on Monday by the Global Nutrition Cluster, an aid partnership led by UNICEF. And they found that 95% of Gaza's households, adults were restricting their own food to ensure small children can eat, while 65% of families eat only one meal a day. More than 90% of children younger than 5 years old in Gaza eat 2 or fewer food groups a day, known as severe food poverty, the report said. A similar percentage are affected by infectious diseases, with 70% experiencing diarrhea in the last 2 weeks. More than 80% of homes lack clean and safe water. Just absolutely horrendous conditions. And it's why it's so important to keep in mind that even if there were a ceasefire today, more Palestinians would continue dying because of the fact that the infrastructure has been completely destroyed in Gaza, because of the fact that there's diseases now spreading. It's just such a terrible situation that could have been avoided, but not only did Israel carry it out, they did so with the support of the United States government. And I want to show you one other video from CNN's investigation, the final video that I think you should know about, and it has to do with the roads that I was referring to earlier. Now, again, in order for the convoys to get to Palestinians, they need safe roads with no obstruction in order to get to the Palestinians. But that's usually not the case, and I want to show you why.
Even when convoys are allowed through, some routes are simply not passable. This large crater blocking Al Rashid Road just weeks before it was designated by the IDF as the main route permitted for humanitarian vehicles.
Such large percentages of the population are at such dire need, at such immediate risk of starvation. From that perspective, it's really hard for me to understand what kind of potential military rationale could be advanced to justify actions like this.
And she makes a really good point. How do you justify telling a humanitarian convoy, okay, you're good to go, we know you're coming, we know where you're gonna be, we're gonna protect you, and then the IDF engages in shelling the convoy? How do you justify allowing the convoy in, knowing that they're trying to reach the 300,000 Gazans in Northern Gaza, and then you bomb the road they need to get to Northern Gaza? What is the justification? And the truth is, guys, there is no justification for that. You'll hear the officials say over and over again that the loss of any civilian life is a tragedy and it's not something that Israel is in favor of. And I would be willing to believe that when they say it, if their actions proved it, but their actions don't prove it. Their actions prove otherwise. And one final thing I'll say about this is, President Joe Biden, on various occasions, in an effort to continue appealing to Democratic voters who are absolutely shocked and disturbed with what's happening in Gaza, has said multiple times that he is a firm believer in the two-state solution, that he is not in favor of Israeli occupation. Well, earlier this week, we shared a story about how Palestinians had brought a case before the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, arguing that they were being occupied by Israel in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. And guess what happened today? Well, the United States, which allegedly wants to push for a two-state solution, argued that Israel is not occupying Palestinians. So actions speak louder than words. I think this story is a perfect example of that. You have Israelis saying, no, we're totally in favor of humanitarian aid getting into Palestinians, and then their actions prove otherwise. You have Joe Biden saying that he's a firm believer in the two-state solution, and then you have the United States providing cover for Israel's occupation of Palestinians before the International Court of Justice. And it's pretty sick to think that our government can lie to us like that and think that we're not smart enough to look up the details, look up the research and see what's really happening. But this is what the reality of the situation is. And you really have to ask yourself if you as an American are comfortable with the fact that so many civilians are dying as a result of how this war is being carried out. Again, I've got no love for Hamas and I have no problem with Israel going after Hamas. What Hamas did on October 7th was absolutely deplorable, disgusting, and they should be brought to justice. But defending yourself doesn't mean that you get to wipe out a population, ethnically cleanse an entire region of Palestinians, and level the territory that they've been living in. But that's what's happening on the ground. That's what the reality is.